right, folks. The Cine Geezers are once more in their respective houses. The gentleman who is flanked by a bunch of really good posters is Stephen R. Bissett. And me, I'm the humble and hopefully lovable G. Michael Dobbs.
You're very
Steve,
lovable and very humble.
well,
So,
I try to be. So,
eh,
Steve, we're going to talk today about Frankenstein, in particular, Del Toro's recent film.
I thought we were talking about Nick Adams in Frankenstein Conquers the World today. Oh,
Are
okay,
we?
never mind. I'm
It
prepared.
could
I'm
happen
prepared.
because one thing on Cine Geezers is that sometimes we're not the best about sticking to the definite
Oh, our
subject.
focus is very, very. We stick to our own rules of engagement.
We
So,
stick to our own.
but I deliberately chose one sheet posters that related to Del Toro's Frankenstein. For instance, of course, The Shape of Water,
Yep.
my favorite Del Toro film. The Funhouse, in which Toby Hooper worked for Universal Pictures and acknowledged Frankenstein, the denizen of the Funhouse, who is drooling here so recklessly on the one sheet poster, wears a Glenn Strange Frankenstein mask through the first half of the film. And of course, for those who complain Del Toro didn't stick enough to Mary Shelley's novel, I think that we do the Ludovico technique like in Clockwork Orange, and they have to watch Frankenstein Conquers the World on a 24-hour loop, and then they will shut up.
Yes. Yes. Um, well, Steve and I, and with pals Mark Mastel and Marty Langford, and
Gary,
was Tanner there? Yeah, Tanner was there.
yeah,
We
and
all, who am I
our
missing?
fellow artist, our printmaker,
Oh, okay. Yeah, Gary Smith.
Gary
Uh,
Smith was there.
so we all trooped up to a place that was more or less central to all of us in Western Massachusetts. Unfortunately, it required a trip for Steve from the Mountains of Madness in Vermont. Um,
I
but
have to
we,
come down to civilization now and again, Mike.
and the reason you're going to say, well, you could see it on Netflix. You guys got Netflix? Yeah, both of us have got Netflix, but we wanted to see this as really Del Toro intended, which was on a big ass genuine movie screen. That's what we wanted because if nothing else, Del Toro is a director whose visual um his visual application of the script is freaking amazing. I mean, when you watch a Del Toro film, there's something in every frame. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
it's
always an
a
abundance of visual riches.
right. And he meant for it to be seen in the theater. I'm really glad that this is one of those Netflix originals that gets theatrical play. I went back a second time to see it locally in Vermont. Well, it was at a local New Hampshire theater. I had to cross the river into no man's land, the take it for granted state of New Hampshire, and uh, and watched it again because I really love the film and I love seeing it in a theater. So,
Well,
but that's the Cine Geezer way, right, Mike?
um, okay, so the bottom line, if you're a cinegeezer, the default to see a movie is always in a theater. That's the default. Now, if you have to see it on streaming or you have to see it on Blu-ray, well, that's fine too. You're still seeing it, but the way you want to see this. The only thing I can say about our experience at the Amherst Cinema, which is in Amherst, Massachusetts, is that we saw an early Sunday morning show in which people wore masks and they only sold 25% of the seats. Um, and to make that a little bit more difficult for us, no concessions could be brought into the
Well,
theater.
you can't squeeze popcorn through your mask. And we're not talking Halloween masks, folks, even though it was Halloween weekend. We're talking masks, face
Right.
masks, right?
And I can tell you, folks, Steve was a little bit disappointed because he is a popcorn guy. He likes his popcorn with his movies,
Yeah.
and there was just no way we could do that. Um, but other than that, I thought the film was amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it was even better second time around, Mike. Um, I you and I have both grown up with almost countless iterations of Frankenstein. If we start counting things like Frankenstein Jr. on Saturday morning TV from Hanna-Barbera, films like Frankenstein Conquers the World or The Funhouse, that's why I say countless. I'm sure we could count the Frankenstein adaptations we've seen, but we also were fortunate enough to grow up with the Hammer film Frankenstein series, in which the focus was Dr. Frankenstein, played by Peter Cushing, rather than the monster, who was the focus of the Universal series, along with the Frankenstein lineage. Um, and I don't go to see a Frankenstein movie seeking the perfect adaptation of a Mary Shelley novel. There is one version that is the perfect adaptation, which we'll talk about later on. But if I want Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I'm here to tell you, I did a head count. I have 12 different paperback versions of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And if I want to experience Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, this book has never been out of print in our lifetime. Not once has it been out of print in our lifetime.
My wife Mary I was talking to her about this, and she was very interested to learn. She was reading a little bit about it and uh, said it's that in the piece that she was reading, it was Mary Shelley was not identified by her full name, but by rather that she was the wife of Percy Bysshe Shelley.
Right.
And I said, that is so ironic because if I go into even a high school and say, how many of you have heard of any poem by Percy Shelley?
No one will know.
But if I say Frankenstein, even kids who really have not even seen a Frankenstein movie, maybe, they know what that is.
Right.
So it's always amazing to me that some people still give her short shrift, even though she's she's had much more of an influence on culture and pop culture than her husband did.
She also wrote one of the first popular apocalyptic novels, The Last Man. Not a well-known novel today, but Mary Shelley was an extraordinary person, an extraordinary novelist, and Frankenstein really is one of the great English language novels. Um, and you know, I didn't drive from Vermont down to Massachusetts to join all of you to see an accurate adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We were going to see Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, and I was not disappointed. We got del Toro's Frankenstein in spades.
Right.
Um, he adapted it to his own needs. He adapted it to the era that we're all living in. He adapted it to very much the times we're living in. Very few films right now arrive at the kind of emotional climax that this film does. I mean, I can't think of many American films this year that I've seen that involve forgiveness as a core theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
After high body count, conflict between father and son, uh, I'm very happy with the film. I look forward to revisiting it probably once a year from this point on, which I do with a lot of Del Toro's films. Not all of them, but many of them.
I agree. I will be rewatching this on Netflix. I haven't done that so far because I've run into a little rabbit hole that I've gone down, and I've got
Oh,
to.
what is that rabbit hole? Oh, Cine Geezer, Mike.
Well, it's way, way off the topic.
Well, Jid, we don't have to spend much time there. Give it 2 sentences and I won't interrupt.
Uh, I rewatched The Bat Whispers by Roland West, the 1930 detective thriller, and um, I said, "Geez, I realize I haven't watched his other films." So consequently, I watched his last film from 1931. It's a modern day pirate movie called Corsair. Then I'm my gummies kicked in at the wrong time last night. I'm watching The Phone in Bed. I'm watching Alibi from 1929, which is also a crime drama by
Yeah, yeah.
All three films, those three films, the star is Chester Morris, another one of these great Hollywood actors who had a very lengthy career, and you're hard pressed to find someone who remembers Chester Morris today, unless, of course, you
She
are.
Creature.
That was one of his last films.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I'm watching this because Roland West. I also recently watched The Monster, Lon Chaney, um, and I've come to the conclusion that this guy was an incredible stylist. Um, and it just, he sort of fascinates me in the way that, a mystery fascinates you. I really want to find out more about this guy. After he did Corsair, he just stopped making movies. And he passed in the mid 1950s. Um, I'm always intrigued by people who in their career and then just sort of live on and you wonder what the hell are they doing? If he wasn't making movies, what was he doing? And then there's the whole issue with Thelma Todd and the rumors, et cetera, that surround around Thelma Todd's apparent suicide. But people also believe that Roland West murdered Thelma Todd in a lover's issue. So anyway, that's my rabbit hole. I'm
I think it's applicable to what we're talking about because Roland West is one of the great stylists of the late
oh,
silent, early sound era. And Del Toro is one of our great stylists in the 21st century, the contemporary cinema scene that we're in. And I can't think of many directors who could have mobilized what a director like Roland West did during his lifetime. I mean, the Bat and the Bat Whispers, there's sequences in those films that involve miniature models, insane camera moves,
yep.
starting on street level and going up skyscrapers and into windows, and that's the kind of intense visualization that Del Toro brings to his film work as well. So I don't think you're off our métier by going there. So
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the hall pass for me.
well, it also says to me that Roland West had, during his film career, had access to resources that most crime filmmakers did not have
No,
until much, much later in the 20th century. And the same goes with Del Toro. I mean, let's face it, the budget for Del Toro's Frankenstein is, I I haven't done the math, Mike, but let me throw this out there. I think more was spent on Del Toro's Frankenstein than every Hammer film production ever made combined.
I would agree with that.
I
Be
mean, most of those Hammer films were under $200,000. They were none of them came even close to $500,000 budgets.
well,
Um,
the what we can both agree on, I know, is the technical proficiency of how those films were made, how they looked. Hammer Hammer knew how to stretch a dollar or a pound, um,
yeah,
right?
we'll stick with pounds now. So
And but no, they knew what they could get on screen. And in the very best Hammer films, you can see that they maximize their budget incredibly. But
yeah,
you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm sure the catering bill for Del Toro's Frankenstein, Hammer
outstrips
probably could
any
have made
Hammer.
a feature off of the catering bill.
They probably could have made 5 features off the catering bill. I mean, uh, when I see current reviewers and pundits on social media referring to this as Del Toro's Hammer production, they have no idea what a Hammer production is. If they're saying that, art directors like Bernard Robinson and cinematographers like Jack Asher were working in mere days with meager resources on those Hammer films to realize, miracles
Right,
in terms of
right.
what hit the screen. And even the lesser Hammer Frankenstein films, like I think most people would agree that The Evil of Frankenstein from the early 60s, directed by Freddie Francis, is probably one of the least interesting Frankenstein films when it was new and in hindsight. but director Freddie Francis and the Hammer crew make it look like an incredibly expansive production, and it has one of the best lab sets of any horror film of the 1960s. So, even when there was a paucity of inspiration and a paucity of means, they did it. They brought it to the screen with style. And
I think with their handling of Frankenstein, in fact, um, I looked up the reviews for several of the Frankenstein films I knew that we were going to talk about.
how far back would you like to go? Should we start with the Edison Frankenstein?
Sure, let's start with Edison. Uh,
Right.
and I should note that I'm pretty sure the Edison film is on YouTube, and if you folks haven't seen it, you should watch it. In fact, anything that Steve and I tell you to watch, you should watch.
Yeah.
Watch.
Yeah.
Um,
So the first Frankenstein from 1910, it's called Edison's Frankenstein. Thomas Edison had nothing to do with the making of it, but it was his imprimatur, his studio that produced and released it. Uh, is a really interesting film. It's essentially a one reel adaptation. One reel meaning what, Mike? 20 minutes tops.
yeah.
And it was a lost film for most of our lifetime. I mean, we saw the reproduction in Castle Frankenstein and in Famous Monsters of Filmland of that famous cover of the Edison uh,
It was the catalog.
promotional magazine,
Yeah,
right?
it was the catalog. This was what they were sending out to Nickelodeons to say, this is what we have for you.
And there was a cover featuring the actor Charles Ogle, who may or may not have a relation to two of your good friends in Massachusetts. I've never asked Tanner, cartoonist Tanner Ogle, are you related to Charles Ogle in any way?
Okay, well,
Um,
that will come up very quickly. We'll make sure that happens.
okay, I'm curious. And Charles Ogle was one of the early silent movie actors. I've got a tobacco card that I found on eBay for him, and not associated in any way with Frankenstein. It's just Charles Ogle, character player, and it's a very concise compression of certain elements of the Mary Shelley novel, including the creation of the monster, which in the Edison Frankenstein is more of an act of alchemy than medical science. He's not pieced together from pieces of dead bodies. They actually built a dummy of Charles Ogle's Frankenstein likeness and burned it and then projected it in reverse. And to me, it's fascinating because it anticipates, that climax of Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead with the stop motion animation of the final corruption of the possessed zombies. And once the monster exists, Dr. Frankenstein shuns it. Disaster results during his wedding. The monster appears, and there's a final confrontation with the monster and the creator, in which the monster basically evaporates. In some ways, it anticipates the end of F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu. And it's a really interesting film, and I imagine it. I mean, this is one of the first American horror films, although it wasn't sold as a horror film. They didn't have the term horror film yet.
Right.
But this predates, all of Lon Chaney's genre works. This predates any of the German silent films that were being imported into America, like The Golem and Nosferatu, and especially Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And that's really the ground zero of still viewable, still in existence Frankenstein adaptations. I should also mention I wrote an article for a magazine we both wrote for, Video Watchdog, about the resurrection of Edison Frankenstein. A man named Alois Dettklaff had the only print known in the entire world of Edison Frankenstein. And he basically, this is before film preservation, before film archiving, he protected this precious reel that he owned. And whatever complaints have been leveled against him, and many have been over the years. Why didn't he entrust it to an archive? Why wasn't it properly preserved? He protected that film into the 21st century. And the way I first saw it was I bought the DVD that he himself put together and sold in the last year or so of his life. very tragic ending. I mean, he died in his apartment and was found much later. And I have no idea what the fate of the actual film element is. But as you said, Mike, it's on YouTube now. Like you can view it anywhere for free. And part of why he was holding on to it all those years is nobody was offering him what he felt it was worth.
Right.
And I understand that as well. I mean, this is a guy holding on to the only, retirement fund he imagined he had, but he held on to it too long. But thankfully, he did get it transferred to DVD and was able to self distribute it. And he found out what you and I have found out time and time again in our respective lifetimes, which is if you can't get distribution, you ain't going to make anything on it.
That's
So,
right. That's right. Um, yeah, I'm sure I don't know the guy naturally, but I have to say, I'm sure he saw that word Frankenstein and understood that the word itself could equate dollars. Now, if he had opened up a film canister and found the outtakes of Eric von Stroheim's Greed, he may not he may not have said, "Oh, okay, what am I going to do with this?" But
right.
just the idea that he knew he had the only copy of the first adaptation of that book, and that name resonates so much in popular culture. I can't blame him in a way. He knew he had something. It's just, he perhaps waited a bit too long and made some incorrect assumptions about how to preserve it, but nonetheless, it's here
And he didn't
because
destroy
he
it.
kept it.
And he didn't destroy it.
Yeah.
Whatever his preservation methods, however crude and homemade they were, he did not destroy the film, and that cannot be said about a lot of lost films today. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. And people, younger Cine Geezers, Cine neophytes,
and we
uh,
know you're out there.
just understand that motion pictures were up until the advent of television, for the most part, they were one and done. They were considered very much a throwaway medium. The only thing that motion pictures offered was the sale to uh, a distribution company that would bring the films back. Um,
Real art,
Real art is the
film classics. I mean, there were a number of these companies that their bread and butter was re-releasing films that were 5 to 10 years old or older.
Astor is another one.
Astor Pictures,
And
exactly.
there's a tremendous book that was written about Astor Pictures, and it listed every film that they released, either as something original or something that's a favorite from the past. Um,
And nobody was going to reissue the 1910 Frankenstein. I mean,
no, no,
the licensing opportunities for this collector were very finite in his lifetime. Had he lived to today, who knows what might have been possible. In fact, it could have become part of the budget of this Del Toro remake
yeah,
of further protecting the film and taking better care of this collector. But that was not true in his lifetime, and there was no Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg or George Lucas stepping up to the plate to say, "Oh, you've preserved something important to our entire cultural history and pop culture. We'll take care of you."
yeah,
Nobody was doing
yeah.
that. He was on his own. So he was a genuine Cine Geezer, by the way, Mike.
Yes. Oh, I
He
understand.
transcends our mere poppers geezerdom. So
But what fascinates me about the Edison Frankenstein is that it's when you watch it, it is coherent. As you mentioned, it hits on key points from the novel. But what also fascinates me is I always wonder why it wasn't followed up with more of the same. Throughout the silent
well, it was. There was a genuine lost film called Life Without Soul,
Oh yes,
a
yes,
feature film called Life Without Soul, which I first read about in Carlos Claren's absolutely
yes.
essential 1967 and illustrated history of the horror film. And he wrote about it in
Finished
there.
right behind me, and that shelving unit is
And
correct.
he wrote about it as if he'd seen it, which is possible. Carlos Clarence being of an age that he may have actually seen the film before it was lost. Well, I have no idea, and there's no way to tell from the text itself because the entire text is written. It's not an academic text by any means. It is a popular, you know, chronology of the history of a genre, but it was a seminal book. It was a Bible for me. So Life Without Soul did follow up Frankenstein and followed it up as a feature film. My understanding is it had a more contemporary setting. It was more involved with the so-called monster, the creature that was created artificially. Then there are also films like Alraune, Alraune, which Deaf Crocodile has just released, the Paul Wagner version of Alraune, that involved the artificial creation of a woman from mandrake root, from another sort of alchemical approach. But it's not Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Uh, my point is there were other, iterations of Mary Shelley's basic theme and concept. Um, which brings us to, well, two things I want to mention. For anyone complaining about the changes from the novel in this current adaptation, that first Frankenstein changes the novel considerably. But what they all hold on to, what the through line to me from Edison's Frankenstein to Del Toro's Frankenstein, is they all involve the doctor, the medical student Frankenstein creating from scratch an artificial human being, and it's all about how they mirror one another, their conflict, and how they mirror one another. And in the Edison Frankenstein, it's literally the confrontation in a mirror where the monster dissolves and then its reflection dissolves. I mean, I can't think of a more concrete metaphor in that early silent film than how it's presented in Edison's Frankenstein. And Del Toro goes there as well, only he approaches it as a father and son. And literally that's what the film becomes about, which is, the spurned son, the exiled son, and the consequences for all involved. Everyone in the family suffers the consequences.
Well, at the end credits, Del Toro thanked both Boris Karloff and James Whale, which I thought was tremendous. I appreciated that because we know that he's as big a geek fan as you and I am.
Yeah.
But
My only surviving high school drawing is this pencil sketch from January of 1973, which tells you how much I loved Boris Karloff's role as the Frankenstein's monster. We grew up with those James Whale films, didn't we, Mike? We also grew up with all the many of the Universal films were available to us on television, not all, but
yeah.
the Roland V. Lee Son of Frankenstein, the later iterations with Ghost of Frankenstein, which in and of itself is a pretty fascinating movie. But let's talk about James Whale and Boris, since you went right there.
So I looked up a review this morning. This is from the Motion Picture Herald, which was one of the dominant film trade publications. This is from November 14th, 1931. And this is just part of it. But if Universal's production of Frankenstein does nothing else, it establishes Boris Karloff as one of the most important candidates who has risen for the mantle of the late Lon Chaney as a delineator of the weird in grotesque roles. By the way, note, there's nothing about horror. Grotesque, weird. Horror is a term that has really sort of come a little bit later in the cycle.
Right.
Because of his restraint, his intelligent simplicity of gesture, carriage, voice, and makeup, Karloff has truly created a Frankenstein monster. Had he yielded to the temptation to melodrama as the opportunity offered, the character would have been far less formidable, horrible, terrible, and a lot of other, um, excuse me, and I dictated this into the goddamn computer and I can't even read my own dictation. But you get the point here. It says Karloff has done some excellent things in pictures, though usually in minor roles. I think that was a very nice thing for him to say
Oh
because
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because Karloff was a great actor, but he really wasn't given an opportunity to shine until 1930, 30.
30, 31. Yeah, I mean, he was appearing in serials like The King of the Congo and so on in villain roles, and he was in. There was a silent pseudo horror film called The Bells that I've seen photos
Right.
where he's almost looks like a Dr. Caligari type figure.
But for
Um,
him, in
the
talking,
Criminal Cold.
the criminal code was his big break, actually. That's what got him the attention of a lot of people. But and the reviewer said this is his big opportunity, and whether you like the picture or not, you won't deny his efficacy. As I've said before, I don't pretend to know what any picture will do at the box office. So this guy is an honest guy, because most of these reviewers in these trade publications would say this is going to be boffo, or
Right.
put this at the bottom of a double bill, you know?
Right. Might play in the nabes,
Yes.
meaning neighborhood theaters, but
In the future episodes of Cine Geezers, we'll talk about the language of trade magazines.
well, we did touch on that with our earlier Cine Geezer where we talked about Variety magazine,
Yeah.
and yeah, there is an entire dictionary of how films were spoken of in the trade publications.
So he goes on to say, I certainly do not know what Frankenstein will do, but like every other newspaper man, I know that America is full of people who fight their way into murder trials, dash off to see the scenes of revolting crimes, get up at night to run to fires, buy millions of copies of newspapers to read the life stories of murderers. I know there are a million people who would use all the influence they could muster to witness a hanging or electrocution.
Whoa.
You know, almost every mortician can point out a dozen or so score who are professional funeral goers. Others, with a milder form of the sensation phobia, content themselves with visiting cemeteries to read tombstone inscriptions or regale themselves with ghost stories. And I have a hunch these same people may rush to go see Frankenstein. I have a hunch others may just see it to see if it is as bad as Mrs. Jones said it was. And he ends up says that that bump too is in a lot of us. So what fascinated me about this review is he liked the picture. He goes on, the review is much longer. He likes the picture. He extols James Whale's direction. Um, Colin Clive and May Clark are mentioned very favorably. But what I liked about this is he's trying to define what is in Frankenstein as a story that attracts people.
Yeah,
Uh,
but he's also taking the tack. I tell you what came to mind immediately as you were reading that, Mike, which was the negative reviews for John Carpenter's The Thing in 1982. I mean, Time magazine, and I'm paraphrasing here, basically said, this isn't a film for average people. This is for the weird little boy that lives across the street. Well, I'm that weird little boy, first of all. And secondly, John Carpenter's The Thing captured the zeitgeist of the Reagan 80s better than any other American film that was made during the 80s. And yet, all the critics could express was their utter revulsion at the movie. And that comes through in early reviews when you seek them out for the Universal Dracula from the year before Frankenstein, and what you've just read with a trade review for Frankenstein from 1931. You know, even when the reviewer is impressed with the film and goes out of their way to detail the components of the film that made such a positive impression on them, they also feel like they have to go out of their way to try to define what type of personality might be attracted to this movie. And it's all depraved personalities. It's all people with ghoulish interests. Boris Karloff was interviewed many times. There were articles that were published under his name in Photoplay magazine and so on. He would always talk about the letters he got from children.
right.
He didn't talk about, oh, I heard from a guy that likes to go to trials. That's John Waters who likes to go to trials, right? I mean, Karloff's always expressed great affection for the monster,
Yes.
not his performance, not James Whale. He would always say, the monster has been very kind to me.
Mhm.
And he would always talk about letters from children who understood the monster. They saw the film either in a theater, later in his career and life on television, and the people moved to write to him tended to be children, if we're to believe Karloff's version of events. And just as Bela Lugosi tended to get letters from women who found his performance as Dracula a romantic performance. Um, so I almost feel like an entire book could be done just of negative reviews of horror movies to try to capture all the almost Lovecraftian use of language affixed to what sort of depraved personality would go see something like this.
Oh, there's the first book of the Cine Geezers imprint then we can put together.
um,
I just want to add one thing. Um, I've read this repeatedly. The little girl in Frankenstein, the little girl who Karloff is playing with the flowers,
Maria.
who originally was supposed to set her gently into the lake, um, and see if she would float like the flower petals. And instead, Whale supposedly said, "No, no, you heave her." That little girl um, didn't see Karloff in makeup until that scene. And the story that's been printed is that there were cars to take the cast and crew to the lake to photograph that sequence. And the little girl was told to sit in this car. Karloff apparently is in full Frankenstein makeup. And she says, "No, I want to ride with Boris." And his point was the point of the story was is that children saw the monster as one of them. He doesn't know everything. He's not like an adult.
Yeah.
He's asking questions. He's trying to figure stuff out.
And
Um,
nobody's helping him. I think kids also related to that. Like
right. And
he's
he's
he's an
misunderstood.
outsider in the adult world, and whenever an adult confronts him, unless they're blind, they're aghast at him.
But then that point made in Bride of Frankenstein, which I'm going to say is probably one of the top five horror films of all time.
I think it's one of the top 5 films of all time.
Okay.
So
So,
yeah.
I mean, Whale's point in there is that if the monster, if you simply accept the monster, he's not a monster. He's just a guy who doesn't really talk much and has a lot of questions. Um,
I love Ernest Thiesinger's reaction to his first meeting with the monster. The monster's Boris is down in the tomb hiding in the shadows, and we
right.
watch as Ernest Thieziger is playing Dr. Pretorius. And he's come down into the tomb with 2 gravediggers, one played by Dwight Fry, so that they will exhume the bones that he's going to use for his more alchemical approach to manifesting new life forms. And he wants to build a woman, and the monster is hiding in the shadows, and then sort of nervously, he doesn't furtively, but he kind of nervously steps out of the shadows because all he's seen is people react in horror to him, and he makes a gesture with his hands, and Ernest Thieziger goes, "Oh, I thought I was alone," and offers him some alcohol. It's my only vice. um
A line he
but
repeats throughout the film about all sorts of other.
all the vices, cigars. Yeah, right, exactly. Um, but it's a beautiful moment because we've seen earlier in the film that the only other person who accepts him as he is a blind hermit. The role later played very well and parodied in Young Frankenstein with Gene Hackman playing the hermit. Um,
It is.
and
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
those key points are central to what James Whale was presenting in that film. His core philosophy
Yeah.
of taking people at face value, even when it's Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
Um,
Right. Don't make assumptions. Don't
right,
make assumptions. Um, I found this. I think you'd be interested in this. Um, uh, Most people associate like 1930, in fact, anything before 1934 as pre-code, before the Hollywood production code came in, which was self-censorship. It was initiated in the 1920s, but never really enforced. And then it became enforced when the Catholic Church was talking about either forcing the federal government to have censorship. In this case, what the Catholics did was to form the Legion of Decency, where from the pulpit,
right.
the priest would read off condemned movies. Hollywood wanted to blunt that as much as they could. So pre-code, Frankenstein is considered pre-code, but that doesn't mean there weren't censors at that point. There were state censorship boards. Most states in the United States had a censorship board where they would censor a motion picture. Um, so,
Massachusetts was particularly aggressive in
well,
that
yeah,
regard.
because I grew up with the phrase, hearing the phrase "banned in Boston."
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah. Me too. Yeah, exactly.
so the Motion Picture Herald, December 19th, 1931. So this is just right after the release of Frankenstein, had an article from Kansas. The Kansas State Censor was going to censor the film, and there was a huge outcry from Kansans. Don't do that. In fact, it went up to the governor, and the governor was against the censorship of Frankenstein. And I thought,
Cool.
the article did not say what was offensive in the film, because when you actually read what these censors were going after on the state level, it varies dramatically.
Oh yeah, sometimes it was language, the talk of God. I mean, there is pretty blunt dialogue that even made it through. I mean, when you talk about the state censors, Mike, before that, James Whale had to run the hurdle of Universal Studios' own sensibility.
Right.
There were things removed from the film before it ever played commercially that the studio wanted to, finesse. Let's use that word. Then you get into state by state. What are the censors going to do? And there is language in Frankenstein that is still pretty effectively engages with the whole question of, what's the role of science and what's the conflicts between the ethics of science and the perceived lack of ethics of science in light of religion, particularly organized religion.
Well,
Um,
we do know that after Frankenstein was one of these films that, along with Dracula, that Universal periodically, when they needed some money,
Trot it out.
they would do a double feature. They would re-release them. It was like King Kong at RKO. And
Only more often from Universal. Like, the combo of Dracula and Frankenstein. Yeah, you're right. We don't know how much money those movies ever actually made cumulatively. We have no idea.
but what I was going to say is that the key line that I always heard was taken out of those um, code era prints was that, oh God, now I know what it feels like to be God.
Right.
So if you're watching a print of Frankenstein and it's got that line in it, then you're probably watching something that was exactly what was James Whale's perception, his intent. If it's missing, and you can tell it's missing, there's a hell of a jump cut there,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
then it's something that came after the code, because saying now I know what it's like to be God is certainly would be inflammatory to some censors, especially at that time.
Actually, it also means that you're seeing a print in circulation before the restoration of the film on VHS.
Right,
There are VHS collectors who seek out that first MCA Universal release because it's the version that played on television. And once it was restored, that became the one that plays on Turner Classic Movies is the full version. Meaning now in the year 2025, it's harder to see, just as with King Kong, it's harder to see the film as it played post code and pre VHS era. Before, in the case of King Kong, it was restored
right,
in the 70s and then restored with a higher degree of polish during Turner Classic Movies' reign,
right.
Ted Turner's reign. So, yeah, point taken on that. Same with Bride of Frankenstein. The Bride of Frankenstein, Universal insisted on some changes to that film before it was released. But because it was from 1935 post code, we've grown up with the same version of Bride of Frankenstein that just played on Halloween on TCM.
Right.
I mean, that's a more standardized iteration of the film. It's also interesting to note, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. I think Bride of Frankenstein is the first movie that opens with Mary Shelley and her husband and their friend having a dialogue by the fireplace and, asking, Mary, what happens next? Which has a number of conceits. First of all, that early in Mary's lifetime, it was known she'd written Frankenstein. When Frankenstein was first published, her name was not on it. Um, it also proposes that the version of Frankenstein that we saw with Boris Karloff and Colin Clive was anything like the novel, which it really isn't.
No.
And then it proposes that Mary had a sequel in mind, and let me tell you what happened. Um, but it's a beautiful opening to the film, and it reminds me of the made-for-TV Frankenstein: The True Story, which when it was originally broadcast, opened with James Whale as an actor. I'm sorry, James Mason, not James Whale. I brain fart there. James Mason as an actor who appears in Frankenstein: The True Story, playing Dr. Polidori, a modern iteration of Dr. Pretorius, talking to the audience and walking with a copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to her gravestone to talk about her. So much like Bride of Frankenstein, it's trying to present itself as an accurate rendition of the novel. Although Frankenstein: The True Story, despite its title, is an even further deviation from Mary Shelley's novel than the alterations people are complaining about today in Del Toro's Frankenstein.
Right.
But I've jumped the gun here.
Well, I just want to, in our sort of rough chronological journey leading up to Del Toro, um, I I just have to say, in the ads for the 1931 Frankenstein, the the line that is in the ads is the man who made a monster. And so somebody in the ad department at Universal said, "Okay, let's clarify exactly what that one word title of Frankenstein really means."
Right.
Now we get to Bride of Frankenstein. Now, yes, in the movie, there is a Bride of Frankenstein. There is a bride. Valerie Hobson is the actress. Frankenstein is Colin Clive. But it's my contention that they started muddying the waters about the name Frankenstein with
Right there.
with that picture. Son of Frankenstein, directed by Roland V. Lee, and was that 38 or
1939.
okay?
They
So
had a huge success in 38 with a surprising bankroll at the box office from reissuing Dracula and Frankenstein together, which you were talking about a few moments ago. So that prompted the studio gearing up. The studio, by this time, Universal, under new management,
yes.
um, gearing up a brand new super production of Son of Frankenstein, 1939.
Do you know that after he lost the studio, and I mean, I really believe that it was Carl Laemmle Jr. losing the studio, not Uncle Carl.
Right.
Um, One of his big projects in life was developing and marketing a self-heating hot dog.
And did he accomplish
I
this?
don't know.
Have you ever had one? I've never found one.
I'm trying to wonder how they did that. But I read that and I was like,
Mike, we were all born with
ah.
self-heating hot dogs. I mean, let's face it. I hate to go there, but since you bring it up, no pun intended, we all have self-heating hot dogs.
Well,
Well,
I encountered something from a 1938 um, film daily. Uh, where is it? I got multiple notes here. Anyway, it was a theater in 1938 that had booked Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein. And the article was the ballyhoo that this guy did and that he made a ton of money. So this actually precedes Son of Frankenstein. And he went to the extreme of doing a life-size standee where young women could put their heads
into
onto
the bride, they could
into
be
the
the
bride
bride.
and get your
Oh,
photo
cool,
taken. He
cool.
hired a guy in the monster makeup to like be stalking the halls of the theater.
This
And
is showmanship.
this is great showmanship, but it also reflects what we're talking about, which is these films made such an impression in popular culture that they're
Yeah,
brought back a few years later, and it's like printing money for Universal. They're having to spend a minimal amount of money. That is the preparation of prints, shipping of prints, and advertising materials. But that's nothing compared to making the movie. And Frankenstein was just something that made a ton of money over and over and over. And so did Dracula. I don't want to mess with any Bela Lugosi fans, and because I know they're a little bit rabid. Um, but the bottom line is that so here was an independent theater owner. He gets this idea. Let's bring these two back as a double feature. Let's ballyhoo the hell out of them, and he makes a lot of money. He gets featured in a major trade publication, and I'm sure there were other theater owners who
Oh yeah,
then
yeah.
said, "Hey, if this guy made money, we can make money because Frankenstein and Dracula make money."
And bear in mind, folks, given the industry standards of the time, those would have been films that that theater owner could have booked at a flat rate. He'd have known exactly what he was paying to show those prints, and it wasn't like a brand new Universal picture in 1938 where a chunk of the box office was going to go to the studio, not the theater. When they booked Dracula and Frankenstein, or in this case, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, they were probably very inexpensive flat rate rentals. And I'm sure that policy changed very quickly once Universal was rolling out those double bills as a new item from Universal.
Right, right.
That theater owner investing all that capital into hiring somebody in the makeup, building the standee, that was more of a standard aspect of theater ownership and management back then, wasn't it, Mike? I mean, we look
Well,
at these trades and they're full of photos of the
well, that's
extraordinary
why
promotion.
I want to put a book together about how movies used to be sold because Richard Gordon once, I'm going to drop a name. Richard Gordon, the famed film producer, independent, of Fiend Without a Face. He always defined the film industry as production, um, distribution, and marketing. That there were three entities that went toward the creation of a successful motion picture. And the three entities were viewed as sort of, they're three dominoes because you can't have a success if one of those is off kilter, if you miss it. Um, so it's obvious, back in the day, the theater owner actually embodied a lot of all three. Theater owners were asked what kind of movies they wanted. Um, Theater owners had the ability to advertise and ballyhoo the heck out of stuff.
You had theater owners who moved into distribution and production. Joseph
Yes.
E. Levine, Robert Lippert. I mean, we could name a number of well-known to Cine Geezers producers and distributors, including James Nicholson of AI American International Pictures, who got their start working in theaters. And I'm not talking about as projectionists or selling popcorn. Robert Lippert owned theaters and got frustrated with the inability to get product and decided, well, I can make these,
Yeah.
and started making films, and formed a production and a distribution outfit.
His whole Lippert's whole marketing scheme was I make movies for you, the theater owner. He doesn't say I make movies for audiences.
No, 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 no. And he spoke as if I'm one of you and I am.
Right, right.
Right.
So, Frankenstein had this incredible afterlife that essentially
Still
kept going
still
as
does. I mean, look at the when you use those three factions that Richard talks about, look at the muscle that went behind this new Frankenstein. I've seen, I don't know how many posters now, five, six different one sheet posters and poster graphics that were created to promote Del Toro's Frankenstein. The fact that it opened theatrically before beginning to stream on Netflix is amazing in and of itself. That's a rarer and rarer event these days, and it's only certain films that are selected for that.
they
Um,
they want to select films that they think could be receiving Academy Award nominations.
well, there's that, but there's also the expense of, I mean, the fact that Del Toro's Frankenstein opened in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire. I mean, I had a choice of places to drive to, and that's rare with any of these Netflix or Amazon pictures that open theatrically first. I'm not going to drive to Boston. It's just too
Yep.
far, and Boston is insane to drive
Yep.
in. um, but
Those of you who are watching outside the state of Massachusetts, don't go to Boston. Don't ever
now,
drive into Boston.
the cachet you're talking about with the name of Frankenstein meant that uh, by the time we get to not the 1940s, because Universal's hold on their trademark, they didn't own Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but they owned their monster.
Yes.
That is the James Pierce. I'm sorry, Jack Pierce makeup design of Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster is what Universal owned, and they retained that for every iteration that followed. Karloff's last performance as Frankenstein's monster for a feature film was Son of Frankenstein in 1939. After that, it was Lon Chaney Jr. After that, it was Glenn Strange. He played the monster, very perfunctory screen appearances in House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, 1948. Within 10 years, that Universal cycle had spun all the way to comedy and then disappeared. And by the beginning of the 50s, other producers realized, oh, we can use the name of Frankenstein. Like nobody can stop us. That's public domain. So we have Frankenstein's daughter. We have all
Frankenstein.
these iterations of Frank. I was a teenage Frankenstein. Can you think of others, Mike, before we get to Hammer?
Didn't Jerry Warren do Frankenstein Island?
Frankenstein's Island, 1980, much later. Yep, yep.
But
Um,
it's still the fact that that is, you know,
it's the name,
oh,
and
you're right. All
Frankenstein conquers the world from Toho Studios in Japan. Willis O'Brien had long tried to sell the premise of a film called King Kong versus Frankenstein, aka King Kong versus Prometheus, where it was going to be a stop motion animated monster that was fighting with the great simian Skull Island denizen.
I
Um,
just you know, it's interesting what you're saying in that the only thing that Universal really had was the makeup. Um, and uh, 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 in a Cine Geezers show that's going to be coming up probably within a month, we're going to be interviewing Richard Clemenson, who is just a huge figure in horror film academia and fandom. Uh,
Fanzines. I mean, Little Shop of Horrors has
Little
run
Shop of
from
Horrors.
1972 to the present day. He's about to put together his last issue for publication in 2026. That's an amazing. And Richard is one of the American experts on Hammer films.
And the reason I bring this up, other than just a ballyhoo, an upcoming program, is the fact that he has shown that in his magazine over the years, Universal was very concerned about whether or not Hammer was going to uh,
Step
touch
on
on
their
their
toes.
trademark.
Right, right, right.
And therefore, in Curse of Frankenstein, we see a monster it does not look anything close to what Jack Pierce did. And that was very deliberate. Now, because I'm old and feeble, I can't remember which Frankenstein film was where they had the the it was a
E- Evil of Frankenstein with Kiwi
was yeah,
Kingston,
they had the
the square
monster that's
head.
got the head, the square head.
Right. That was Evil of Frankenstein, Kiwi Kingston, and they used that because Universal bankrolled that Hammer film.
Right.
And it was controversial at the time too, because Hammer for the first time could have used the Jack Pierce design, and that's what they approved. Jack Ashton, the makeup man on Evil of Frankenstein, um, reportedly worked up hundreds of sketches, and that's what they went with. It's one of the most grotesque Frankenstein's
Yeah.
monsters of the 60s.
Well,
Um,
I think that one thing about the Hammer films is the fact that they restored the concept that Frankenstein is the doctor.
he's
He's
the
the
doctor,
scientist.
right?
He is not the creature. And so
And we should. I'm sorry.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Uh, you go ahead. Like,
Well, we should also note a couple other things. First of all, The Curse of Frankenstein is the first Hammer of Frankenstein film. It was made in 1956, released in America in 57. It's the first color Frankenstein film, if we don't count a Pete Smith 3D short from the 30s called
oh
Three
yeah.
Dimensional Murder,
Have you ever
which
seen that?
I've only seen clips from it in one of those Don Bluth edited, Frankenstein movie compilations that used to be available on VHS. So I've only ever seen a clip of it and photos from it.
I've
Um,
seen the whole thing.
oh, you've seen the whole thing?
Not with 3D glasses. No, maybe there were 3D. It was a friend of
It's
mine,
cinema.
who's no longer a friend of mine, who's an avid film collector and quite eccentric, and you know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
He had a print of it, and he
Oh
read
my
it
God.
one night, and it was the Frankenstein monster, as I remember it, really came close to the Universal concepts. Um,
Well, the other color Frankenstein's nobody ever talks about is there were cameo appearances of the Frankenstein monster in cartoons,
oh, absolutely.
animated cartoons. A lot of the animated cartoons that involved a library or a book, that characters would walk out of would incorporate usually Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and Jekyll and Hyde. And some of those were color cartoons as we
Yep.
get further into the 30s. So those are technically, I'm sure, the first colored Frankenstein's
Right.
monsters. But the first feature film adaptation slash variation on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was The Curse of Frankenstein from Hammer Films. And as you say, Mike, it was Peter Cushing's performance as Dr. Frankenstein that was the central focus of that film. Now, both you and I actually laughed aloud during Del Toro's Frankenstein at one moment that was a direct reference to The Curse of Frankenstein. And you know what scene I'm talking about.
Yes, and it was like Del Toro is one of us, as I said before, and so he put some little things in the film to
Oh,
say
yeah, right,
to
exactly.
say that he's honoring them because I'm sure that when he was growing up, he saw this stuff too, and it's like this is his opportunity to say thank you or to have a wink about a little moment that refers to a previous film.
And as Cine Geezers, I have to add, there we were in the theater, six of us, and you and I were the only two that laughed when that happened.
We
Like
are
we're
the
the only two that grew up with Curse of Frankenstein and recognized the moment where the monster is shot in the eye, puts his hand over his face, and blood leaks. That's out of Curse of Frankenstein. That's Christopher Lee getting shot in the head by Dr. Frankenstein's assistant. Um, and
well.
Peter Cushing was brilliant in that film. I mean, every time I've seen that film, whether it's an audience of two in front of a TV set or when I've shown it in a college setting, it always gets a laugh when it cuts from the Christopher Lee's monster moving in on Dr. Frankenstein's mistress, who has just been locked in the lab with the monster, to Peter Cushing sitting at the table going, "Pass the marmalade." Instant laugh line.
Well,
Um,
he created this incredibly obsessed character, and that the whole film sequence that series, I should say, that Hammer did, it was like this guy ain't giving up. He wants to get where he wants to get, and he does not care really how he gets there.
right.
It's not the journey, it's the destination.
What's your favorite of the Hammer films?
The one that really touched me was Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. Because there's that whole thing that he's not creating a flesh and blood aberration of a human, it's brain transplants. And I haven't seen it in years, but if I remember correctly, there's some poignant moments when the brain realizes it's in somebody else's body.
Right.
So
And
it's not it's
he
not about
goes to talk to his wife at one point. It's a
right.
very, 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 horrific and touching scene where the brain goes to talk to his wife, knowing she's not going to recognize him anymore because he's now in a different man's body. Um, and
And I thought that was I thought that was a nice emotional depth to this. It legitimately places some narrative focus on the monster, which isn't really a monster, but the monster. Um, you
Hammer
know,
went further, though. My
yeah.
favorite Hammer film
Okay.
to this day is still the first sequel, The Revenge of Frankenstein. Because at the end of the film, Dr. Frankenstein is his own monster.
Right.
He's been beaten to death by the patients when they realize that he's been using their limbs to build a creature, and he's beaten and tortured by the patients. His assistant salvages his brain and transplants it into a perfect replica body that apparently they had somewhere in the lab. And Peter Cushing is playing the new Frankenstein, and now it's the perfect synthesis of creator and monster
Yeah.
in one body. And it's never mentioned again in the entire Hammer series. So that was the most successful operation, and he didn't do it. His assistant did it, which is part of why I love that film. It's like, oh, but it didn't stop his obsession. He's still trying to resurrect the monster in Evil Frankenstein. Um, he's working on brain transplants in a truly great film, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. He is transplanting souls in Frankenstein Created Women, where the soul of a young man who's been wrongly accused of a crime and is guillotined is transferred into the body of this young man's girlfriend who has thrown herself in a river and drowned. Um, right on through Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, where now Dr. Frankenstein is old and frail. He's got a wig, which Peter Cushing himself said made me look like Helen Hayes, who was an Academy Award winning actress of the day. And he's in a mental asylum, and he's still trying to build a new creature,
You're
played
right.
by David Prowse, who you and I both met at ChillerCon. Very nice man.
Very nice, man. Um, let's talk a couple more minutes because we're gonna have to wrap up here. I'm looking at the clock.
Oh,
Uh,
oh, we're almost right. Well, the Hammer films added gore, which also is relevant to everything that followed, you
right.
know, right to
Well,
the Del Toro Frankenstein.
okay, I'm just gonna say if this film, Del Toro's Frankenstein, was distributed to theaters in a typical feature film, widespread way, I think it would have made tons of money. I really do. Um, because it is so opulent, it is so well realized. The performances, we get once again a really obsessed Dr. Frankenstein.
Oh yeah, yeah, a
Uh,
terrific performance. Um,
and I don't
the
know, I can't remember the name of the actor who plays the creature, but I think he did a tremendous job as well. It was a very physical performance, and although, like in the original book, the creature speaks and he's articulate, um, there's a physicality to what he did, which really added to that performance, I thought.
yeah, yeah, and the nod not only to James Whale and Boris Karloff, but also to Mary Shelley and Bernie Wrightson.
Yes.
And the late great Bernie Wrightson's influence and fingerprints are all over this movie, um,
And you should
all over this
explain,
film.
just give people a sense of who Bernie Wrightson was and why Frankenstein and Bernie Wrightson are melded together here.
Bernie Wrightson was a Baltimore born and raised cartoonist who came into the comic book industry via fanzine art in the mid 1960s. And by 1970, 71, Bernie had worked his way up to being one of the most popular young new cartoonists working for DC Comics and Marvel Comics. But he did his best work for Warren Publications, Creepy, Eerie, Vampirilla. Um, Bernie was obsessed with Frankenstein. He absolutely loved the James Whale, Boris Karloff 1931 film. He loved the Mary Shelley novel to the point where he did the most lavishly illustrated edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And Del Toro based a lot of the sumptuous production design, the makeup of the monster, the look of characters and costumes on Bernie Wrightson's illustrations for that illustrated edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Bernie was also just a wonderful guy. I never had the good fortune to be close friends with Bernie, but I got to meet him. I got to spend a little time with him. He was incredibly generous to those of us who worked on his character Swamp Thing. And you know, he didn't harbor any of the kind of bitterness I've seen others in the same field harbor toward young artists who were working on characters that older cartoonists had co-created or made their mark with. Bernie was incredibly generous with John Tollivan, Rick Veitch, and myself about our take on Bernie Wrightson's co-creation with Len Wein of Swamp Thing. And you
I
know,
met him twice at conventions, and I'm just a simple old gray-haired fanboy. And he was very good to his fans. He was willing to talk. I've got two signed prints of his here, um, and one of them is from the Frankenstein book. And you look at that composition, and it's amazing
yeah,
the depth of detail, and it's
it's
just not
all pen and ink.
right, and it's just not detail for detail's sake. Everything that you see there works organically with his story, how he was visually interpreting the original text.
Yeah,
It's very, his work is very impressive. And clearly, like you say, Del Toro took a lot of inspiration from Wrightson's work.
yeah. If anybody out there who loves or doesn't love the Del Toro film wants to see where it came from, get your hands on any printing that you can afford of the Wrightson illustrated Mary Shelley Frankenstein, and just read the pictures. You know, just drink in the
Right.
illustrations, and there it is in nascent form right there. I also want to. How much time do we have, Mike? Two
Uh,
minutes? 1 minute? Where are we
uh,
at?
yeah, we're heading toward the end of our time. So go ahead.
Well, those who complain about it not being an accurate adaptation, I recommend to you that you track down any release of this film, The Terror of Frankenstein, co-scripted and directed by Calvin Floyd. This was made let me look at the copyright year. Remember copyright years, Mike? 1976. It stars Per Oscarsson from the Ingmar Bergman Swedish films playing Frankenstein's monster. This is the most accurate adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. But I think it also puts paid to the whole conceit that Del Toro's film would have been better if he had just adapted Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because who's heard of The Terror of Frankenstein? Sam Sherman, who co-funded and bought the film for American distribution, never released it theatrically. It went direct to television because he said there's no market for this film. This is the guy who made a fortune on the naughty stewardesses, which is the money that went into The Terror of Frankenstein. Okay. But I recommend that. I also recommend, if you haven't heard of it or seen it, the made for TV two-parter Frankenstein, the True Story. It's one of the few TV movies that not only had a paperback, but this is the paperback of the screenplay, the teleplay for the made for TV movie. It also was honored by Sam Irving in IRVIN. There's no G on the end of it. In his fanzine Bazaar back in the 70s when the film was new. Sam has taken that issue of Bazaar and published a massive Bible-like hardcover book, The Epic Saga Behind Frankenstein, the True Story by Sam Irving. I highly recommend it. This is a definitive book on the making of that TV movie adaptation. And that's what I got, Mike. I could have said more, but we've run out of time.
Yeah, we've run out of time. So, folks, thanks for tuning into this episode. I'm using phrases that a 71-year-old man uses, like
Yeah, yeah. Let's not go
tuning
there.
in.
Let's sign out with style. I recommend a couple of books to you all.
Okay.
My current favorite read is Daniel Kramer's Adventures in Auteurism, A Crusade for the Critically Neglected, forward by Joe Dante. And this is an amazing book. It's available print on demand, and Daniel Kramer is writing about directors nobody has written about. This is my favorite current read. The other book I'm going to recommend, which is actually two books now, there is now two volumes out. Oops, let me do this so that
Yeah.
they're in the correct order on the screen. Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Greg Coulan's Willis O'Brien, Lost Worlds, Giant Apes, and Dinosaurs. These are massive hardcover or paperback books. I recommend, if you can afford it, the hardcover, because you're going to wear out the paperbacks. These are lavishly illustrated, and brings Willis O'Brien's biography up to the year 1949 with Mighty Joe Young. This is the man who created King Kong. And I've literally waited a lifetime for anything remotely like this. I never thought I'd see one book on Willis O'Brien like this, much less these are 2 of 3 volumes. So Greg Coulan, Willis O'Brien, Lost Worlds, Giant Apes, and Dinosaurs, and Daniel Kramer, Kremer, Adventures in Art Tourism. This is what print on demand can do today. And Mike, you have a brand new print on demand book on Tom Tyler that you should mention before we get done here.
Yes, folks. Ending a lifetime obsession. I
Yes.
finally have been able to put together my book on Tom Tyler. It's called The Films and Life of Tom Tyler, Cowboy Monster Hero. It's available at all your major online booksellers. And I am, if you're in Western Massachusetts, or even Eastern New York or Northern Connecticut, I will be putting up on my social media my now growing list of places I will be appearing.
In
Uh,
fact, on our next Cine Geezers, we're going to talk about that, aren't we, Mike?
yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
But
Okay.
in any event, yeah, I'm trying. I've not been reading as much as I just get involved in looking at older films. I've gone through a period now of rediscovering the Ritz brothers. So I've been watching a lot of Ritz brothers stuff. And by the way, they were fucking brilliant. Um, they were comedians. They were often referred to the Marx Brothers, or linked to the Marx Brothers because it was brothers.
I'm going to suggest that we do a Cine Geezers on the Ritz Brothers and my favorite comedy film, Freak,
Okay, then
because I think they require attention, Mike.
absolutely. I'm just ending. I've gone from the Ritz Brothers to now to Clark and McCulloch, another very obscure, unfortunately, comedy team from the 1920s and 30s, and I've started to watch their material. Nothing gives me greater satisfaction, Synergeezer wise, than forcing myself to watch something that I've already always discounted, like who were they, and found out these people were brilliant and they're well worth rediscovery, which
And
is
I'm
one of
doing
these.
I'm doing the same with West German fairy tale movies this week. So,
Yeah, but you'll get paid for that.
well, we'll see.
Yes. All right, so we'll sign off here. My name is Mike Dobbs. You're watching Cine Geezers, and he is.
Stephen Arbacet. I'm a fellow Cine Geezer, and thank you all for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope Mike and I have steered you towards some other wonderful viewing.
Thank you.